Some groups quietly punish individuality through collective mockery. Some connections survive entirely on guilt and obligation. Once these patterns become visible, the capacity to unsee them permanently disappears. That is the true cost of awareness. It dissolves the comforting illusions that once made certain relationships feel safe. People frequently claim to desire truth, but truth reorganizes everything. It reveals power structures concealed beneath social courtesy. It exposes the transactional nature of interactions most people prefer to experience as genuine. Truth requires acknowledging that certain people valued the version of you that could be directed. The darker recognition beneath all of this is that many people preferred the earlier you, not because you were more fulfilled, but because you were more manageable, more susceptible to influence, more emotionally dependent on their presence. The moment you begin constructing an identity that no longer requires external validation as its foundation, social resistance materializes almost automatically. Psychologically, autonomous people resist manipulation, and nothing destabilizes insecure individuals more profoundly than someone who no longer requires permission to inhabit themselves fully. That quality reminds others of the interior constraints they have never confronted, so they redirect their discomfort toward the person who made those constraints visible. What makes this transformation particularly disorienting is that it almost never feels dramatic while it is occurring. There is no definitive confrontation, no final argument, no identifiable moment when everything simultaneously collapses. It unfolds in complete quiet. You gradually stop initiating contact. Certain exchanges begin requiring effort they previously never demanded. You spend more time in your own company and begin noticing that silence feels more honest than performance ever did. One day, something strikes you with unexpected force. Peace has replaced the compulsive need for stimulation. That recognition changes your entire relationship with connection, because most people have deeply conflated emotional intensity with genuine closeness. They believe relationships must perpetually generate excitement, validation, drama, or emotional turbulence in order to feel real. But intensity can become addictive, particularly for people whose early environments required emotional adaptability as a survival mechanism. Some individuals were conditioned from childhood to earn affection through usefulness. Others learned to navigate existence by becoming accommodating. Some developed hyper-awareness of others' emotional states because unpredictability once carried real consequences. Over time, these survival mechanisms calcify into identity: the caretaker, the mediator, the emotionally available one. Eventually, the psyche reaches exhaustion from sustaining roles that were never organically its own. That exhaustion generates a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. If you stop performing for others, who remains? Most people never confront this honestly, because their entire sense of self has been constructed through external reactions. Compliments become the currency of self-worth. Attention becomes evidence of existence. Social belonging becomes a form of moral validation. But the moment you psychologically separate from the compulsive need for external affirmation, something profoundly uncomfortable begins happening. You start perceiving society with different eyes. You observe how extensively human behavior is governed by fear of exclusion, how frequently people override their own instincts to preserve social acceptance. How many individuals remain completely silent in rooms where they privately disagree with nearly everything being said, not because they lack conviction, but because rejection activates something ancient and deeply biological within them. Thousands of years ago, exclusion from the collective meant death. That instinct has not been erased from modern human psychology. It simply expresses itself differently now. It is why people tolerate disrespect to avoid isolation, why they diminish themselves to protect relationships that do not honor them, why they laugh at things that do not reach them, why they apologize for qualities that unsettle others. Most people are not living authentically. They are continuously negotiating psychological survival. And the moment you stop participating in that negotiation in the same way, your presence begins disturbing people without any deliberate action on your part. Your stillness becomes threatening. Your limits become interpreted as coldness. Your self-possession becomes labeled as ego. People grow profoundly unsettled around individuals who no longer operate through unconscious approval seeking. Emotionally autonomous people cannot be redirected through shame with the same ease. This is why certain connections grow colder after genuine healing occurs. The wounded version of you was more accessible to subtle influence. People who carry unresolved trauma frequently tolerate dynamics that psychologically healthier individuals immediately recognize and decline. Many social structures depend on exactly that tolerance to maintain themselves. Consider how consistently groups normalize dysfunction, chronic gossip, quiet disrespect, emotional inconsistency, surface-level support disguised as loyalty, competitive friendships performing as genuine care. Once perception sharpens to a certain degree, the concealed antagonism beneath social pleasantries becomes impossible to ignore. Not everyone celebrating your ambition genuinely wants to witness its fulfillment. Some people find your unrealized potential comfortable because potential still contained is non-threatening. Actual transformation demands comparison, and comparison awakens the insecurity most people have spent years carefully burying. This is why certain individuals withdraw the moment your life genuinely shifts, not materially, but psychologically. Authentic confidence unsettles insecure people in ways that failure never could. Failure is familiar territory. Confidence introduces a quiet hierarchy, and hierarchy silently governs nearly every human interaction, whether or not anyone admits it openly. The deeply uncomfortable reality is that many relationships maintain their apparent stability only because everyone involved has silently agreed to remain emotionally predictable. The moment one person moves beyond that structure, the shared illusion begins dissolving. Not dramatically, but with just enough quiet tension for everyone present to feel it without naming it. Eventually, you stop grieving the specific people and begin grieving the illusion itself. The illusion that everyone who entered your life was intended to remain. The illusion that loyalty automatically persists through psychological transformation. The illusion that shared history guarantees continued emotional alignment. It does not. Time spent alongside someone does not automatically create depth. Sometimes it creates only familiarity, and familiarity can disguise fundamental incompatibility for years, even decades. This is why some people remain surrounded by constant social presence, yet experience a profound and persistent sense of invisibility. Their connections are built on routine rather than genuine resonance. They speak every single day while revealing nothing real about themselves. They share laughter while internally feeling completely unseen. Most people fear isolation so intensely that they accept surface-level connection as a substitute for actual understanding. But shallow connection gradually suffocates self-awareness entirely. You begin editing your own thoughts before you speak them. You reduce your ambitions to dimensions others find non-threatening. You conceal your evolution, not because growth has slowed, but because you have learned that certain environments impose quiet penalties on authenticity. And the penalties are rarely stated openly. They arrive through accumulated social signals, dismissal, mockery, emotional withdrawal, passive resistance to your expansion. Human beings are extraordinarily efficient at enforcing conformity without ever directly discussing it. Carl Jung understood this at a fundamental level. He believed the collective mind applies continuous pressure on individuals to remain psychologically dormant because genuine individuality threatens social predictability. A person who has developed full self-awareness becomes resistant to simple categorization, and society deeply prefers categories: the obedient one, the wounded one, the devoted follower, the entertainer, the reliable provider. Once others identify your function, they understand how to interact with you emotionally. But when you develop beyond the role they have assigned, genuine confusion appears, and confusion converts rapidly into discomfort. That discomfort is precisely why some people invest considerable effort in returning you to who you previously were the moment they detect you changing. Not always consciously. Sometimes they simply miss the version of you that required less from them. The earlier version that absorbed more without responding, that remained quiet when silence was easier than honesty, that prioritized others' comfort over its own clarity. Growth fundamentally disrupts all of that. You begin registering energy beneath words, intention beneath appearance, patterns beneath individual promises. And this entirely restructures how you experience every relationship. A manipulative compliment becomes transparent almost immediately. A rehearsed apology sounds exactly like what it is. Forced enthusiasm becomes visible through its own inconsistency. Performative affection reveals itself through the moments when consistency disappears. Awareness sharpens perception in ways that are simultaneously clarifying and deeply painful. Because once you truly see people with undistorted vision, sustaining comfortable illusions demands more energy than you have left to offer. And still the hardest confrontation of all is not with others. It is with yourself. Because somewhere within this transformation, you recognize your own participation in the illusion. You dismissed clear warning signs to avoid the discomfort of loneliness. You absorbed emotional imbalance because being needed provided a sense of purpose. You overrode your own instincts repeatedly to protect connections that were not protecting you in return. That recognition carries genuine weight. That weight does not generate shame. It demands accountability. The shadow does not only exist in others, it lives within you as well. Your fear of genuine abandonment, your reliance on external validation as a measure of your own worth, your unconscious tendency to mistake emotional intensity for authentic love, your inclination to remain in familiar pain rather than face the uncertainty of unfamiliar freedom. Most people dedicate their lives to observing others while remaining fundamental strangers to their own interior. But genuine self-awareness is uncompromising. It dismantles comforting personal narratives one by one, and eventually you arrive at an understanding that permanently alters your perception of human nature itself. Many people are not connected to each other through truth. They are connected through shared avoidance of truth, through mutual distraction, through collective performance, through emotional dependency that neither party is prepared to examine. This is why genuine authenticity feels so rare in the world. Authentic people disrupt social illusions through their mere existence. They create an involuntary confrontation with the gap between who others are and who others are performing to be. And most people will choose to defend the performance rather than face what the mirror actually reveals. Because the performance is socially celebrated, while the mirror is psychologically costly. After sufficient disappointment has passed through you and left its permanent mark, something inside quiets, not into coldness, but into precision. You stop anticipating emotional depth from people whose survival depends on remaining at the surface. You stop justifying your limits to individuals whose entire orientation requires misunderstanding them. You stop pursuing reciprocity from those whose understanding of relationship is inseparable from personal utility. And in that quieting, life becomes unexpectedly clearer. Loneliness transforms its texture during this stage. What once registered as abandonment begins feeling gradually and genuinely like protection. Because once perception has been sufficiently sharpened, you begin understanding how psychologically costly proximity to unconscious people can be. Not in ways that leave visible marks, but in the slow, cumulative depletion that comes from being in constant contact with unexamined chaos. People who have not developed genuine self-awareness frequently project their internal disorder onto everyone surrounding them. While experiencing themselves as the consistent, reasonable party, they generate confusion and experience it as passion. They practice control and experience it as care. They perform manipulation and call it love. And the most disorienting part of all is that many of them believe their own construction of events completely. Human beings are extraordinarily skilled at constructing self-narratives that protect them from painful recognition. Carl Jung believed the ego builds elaborate internal stories precisely to insulate itself from truths that would require it to change. Few people genuinely want complete honesty about who they are. They want the portion of truth that leaves their self-image undamaged. Which is exactly why genuine accountability is so infrequent, and why people who hold others accountable are so frequently experienced as threats rather than allies. This is why misunderstood people gradually become quieter, not because they have exhausted what they have to offer, but because they have recognized that most people do not listen to understand. They listen to locate confirmation for what they have already decided. And that recognition permanently restructures the way you communicate. You become selective with what you share and with whom you share it. You observe far more than you speak, not from superiority, but from deep pattern recognition. The more developed your consciousness becomes, the more clearly you understand that energy transfers occur constantly between people. Some individuals consistently leave you feeling expanded, clarified, more fully yourself. Others leave you fragmented, depleted, subtly diminished without any identifiable cause. Your nervous system registers these truths before your conscious reasoning catches up to them. That unexplained weight you carry after time with certain people is often psychological misalignment your body recognized long before your mind found language for it. The constant low-grade tension around someone who presents as entirely reasonable is frequently suppressed instinct that knows something your conscious mind has not yet allowed itself to name. You cannot continue expanding while remaining fully anchored to environments that are fundamentally committed to your older identity. At some point, psychological growth requires space. Not isolation as a permanent destination, but separation from the continuous unconscious influence of environments that cannot accommodate who you are becoming. Every genuine evolution of identity involves loss. Loss of familiarity, loss of comfort, loss of the sense of belonging that required you to remain unchanged. But also, and this is the part that takes longest to recognize, the loss of illusion. An illusion is extraordinarily expensive. It costs authenticity. It costs self-respect. It costs the interior quiet that only arrives when you stop performing and simply exist. Most people continue paying that cost indefinitely because the prospect of standing genuinely alone feels unbearable to contemplate. But there is something more unbearable than real solitude. Becoming unrecognizable to yourself in order to remain recognizable to people who never truly saw you to begin with. The most frightening truth at the center of all of this is that outgrowing people is not fundamentally about them. It is about the dissolution of the version of you that once required their presence to feel complete. It is about the quiet, permanent death of the self that needed external permission to exist. And once that version of you releases its hold, once you stop negotiating your own awareness in exchange for someone else's comfort, something opens that no amount of belonging could have given you. You stop being a reflection of every room you enter. You stop adjusting your frequency to make others more comfortable with their own stillness. You begin, perhaps for the first time, to take up the space that was always yours. Carl Jung called this individuation. He called it the most courageous act available to a human being. And he was right.